where we have seen evidence of Chinese authorities being lax on their oversight of pharmaceutical manufacturing or of essentially black market fake drug companies being established and then trying to sell their wares, and those drugs get out into marketplaces in various countries before the authorities are able to rein them back in or to get them under some measure of control. And so then you've got a situation where you've got pharmaceuticals that are out there, people are taking them, but we can't actually verify they are what they say they are. There is, so that you've got a few different accusations that have been going on. One is about China's lack of transparency when it comes to the origins of COVID-19. So their unwillingness, the government's unwillingness to really open up their books to allow lots of international investigators to come in to really understand how this virus got into the human population and how it emerged. So that's one set of these investigations. The second one really comes into this question about the COVID vaccines that have been produced by Chinese pharmaceutical companies and whether or not those vaccines are as effective as they claim. And there's been a lack of transparency and an unwillingness to release the data. So it's hard to confirm that the information that we're getting from official sources is actually verifiable and is actually something that we can use to make sure that people are being kept safe if they are getting the injections of these vaccines. I think that it could be a few different things going on. One could just be being sheerly overwhelmed by everything that is taking place. But I think given the other sorts of geopolitical dynamics that have happened when it comes to COVID-19 and the relationship between China and other countries, there may be a bit of embarrassment, perhaps, or a fear that by opening up and doing this investigation, that it could open them up to allegations of greater misdoing or of deliberately misrepresenting I think the issue that comes up here is that there hasn't been a legacy of transparency and data sharing, and that's something that we've seen throughout the world in countries that have been able to build a measure of trust in their health systems and their scientific systems, not only to say we have this great product, we have this great drug, but also here's the information, here's the data so that you can independently evaluate this and decide whether or not what we are claiming is actually what is being represented in the information. And that's been the part that's been lagging on China's part, which is unfortunate because health diplomacy has been a very important part of their overall diplomatic strategy for going back more than 50 years. We have seen a few COVID-19 vaccines that have been developed by Chinese companies so far, and at least on paper, the raw information that we're getting from the Chinese government makes it look good. But without that extra level of transparency, without that willingness to share that raw data and let other investigators play around with it, it is going to be hard to trust China, and it would put countries in a difficult position to say, yes, we want to accept this vaccine. We think this is safe for our population. We have seen some moves over the past, say, 15 years or so to try to clean up some of these areas and to build more of this trust. But these efforts have not received enough funding to make sure that they're actually engaging in the investigations that they need to do. And the problem has just spiraled out of control. So there probably needs to be more aggressive measures taken by the Chinese government in order to really get the Chinese pharmaceutical industries back up to those standards where we can have that measure of trust. We have seen these vaccines, these COVID vaccines in particular, being a part of a vaccine diplomacy strategy that China has engaged in, trying to differentiate itself from some of its other geopolitical competitors like India, like Russia, like the United States for that matter. And so thinking about how that's going to play out, especially if there are these ongoing questions about the quality of the vaccines and whether or not the vaccines are actually what they say they are, is potentially going to put China in a really difficult position. And so it'll be curious to see how powerful, say, health ministries are versus foreign affairs ministries versus overall questions about China's reputation within the international system. So you've got a few different competing impulses that are potentially about to come into a clash with one another as vaccine diplomacy and health diplomacy become such an important part of China's strategy. It's hard to say exactly what the total financial cost would be, but if this does continue, then we're talking about damages to people's lives and potentially deaths, not just in China, but in other countries as well. And that goes far beyond the economic calculations. And so it'd be my hope that, that this really does spur a movement within the Chinese government to really take these questions seriously, to really prioritize having a system that can rigorously evaluate pharmaceutical claims and then be able to go out in the world, share that information, and restore that measure of trust. There are two things that come to mind as potential strategies. One is to refuse those drugs. If you're not able to share those data with us, if you're not willing to be transparent, we're not willing to accept these products. And the other thing is less what those countries can do, but more it provides openings for other countries to say, hey, we will share this information with you. We will be transparent about this information. So particularly, India and China have been in quite a bit of competition when it comes to vaccines in the last few months. This could be an opening for India, both on a health level, but also on a foreign affairs level, to say, this is why you should go with us. This is why you should trust our vaccines. Here's the information. Here's the data. And we're in a better position to help you out than China is. So it could become part of that sort of geopolitical competition. And that could be a way of trying to force China's hand, essentially, that China wouldn't necessarily want to lose out or find itself falling behind in terms of currying favor with other countries if there is that concern about the pharmaceuticals and the vaccine. That has been something that China has been resistant to up to this point. And so I don't know if this is the issue that might finally push the government over or push Xi Jinping over into making to admitting some mistakes. I tend to think it probably isn't quite yet, but if this does go on, or if we do see widespread outbreaks of injuries or deaths due to these fake medicines and vaccines, then that could push the government into taking a more proactive stance, or at least a stance where they acknowledge their culpability. It very well could. And if I were in a health ministry from one of those countries that was receiving vaccines from China, I would be a bit more skeptical, or at least start to ask some more questions. Because of the fact that there is this lack of transparency, there has been this lack of data sharing, and there has been this history. So I would want to have even more evidence to suggest, yes, these drugs are actually going to be effective and going to be useful for my population.